No one is thinking about you as much as you think, and when you finally accept that, something inside you dies. But in that very instant, something much stronger begins to be born. You spent years trying to be seen, searching for signs in other people's eyes, interpreting silences, waiting for answers that never came. You spent nights wondering what you did wrong, what you lack, why no one seems to notice the effort you make to be okay, to be liked, to hold yourself together. But the truth, the one we avoid facing, is that most people don't care. Not because they're cruel, but because they're trapped in their own fears just like you. Everyone lives inside a small private storm, trying not to sink. And there you are, waiting for a gesture, a message, a validation that might save you from the void. But no one fills the void. The void must be understood, crossed, and honored. That is the first lesson of a free soul, to stop begging for attention and start building presence. When you realize that you don't need to be someone's priority to exist with dignity, everything changes. Because another's gaze stops being a sentence, and someone else's silence becomes a space where you can finally hear yourself. Accepting that no one cares about you isn't bitterness, it's awakening. It's realizing that life doesn't owe you recognition, constant affection, or permanent company. It's understanding that the purest kind of freedom comes when you stop demanding to be understood, approved of, or applauded. And then something strange happens. The noise fades, the anxiety softens, and a serenity appears that depends on no one. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Everything we hear is opinion, not fact. Everything we see is perspective, not truth." When you understand that, you stop reacting to other people's judgments. And in doing so, you discover that true peace doesn't lie in being loved, but in living in coherence with what you believe. That coherence becomes your refuge, because the soul that stands on its own virtue doesn't fear abandonment. It knows solitude is not punishment but fertile ground. There's a part of you that still believes that if you do everything right, someone will come to save you, but no one comes. And that's not a tragedy. It's the beginning of your independence. Compassion doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes the only voice that can lift you up is your own. And when you listen to it with respect, you realize you no longer need approval, only direction. The direction that comes from Logos. That inner reason reminding you that your worth is not up for negotiation. Accepting that no one cares about you means stopping the constant hope of being chosen. It means letting go of the role of the victim and stepping into the place of the wise. Because the wise don't beg for attention, they act with virtue. They don't seek to be seen, they seek to be useful. They don't waste energy convincing, they build. Every day they choose serenity over complaint, action over waiting, silence over the need to explain. When you renounce the illusion of being the center, you realize that what you called loneliness is in fact space. Space to grow, to heal, to reconnect with what's essential. You discover that true companionship is not that of others, but that of your own calm mind. The attention you once begged for turns into focus, into purpose, into real presence. And then everything changes. There's no anger in rejection, no anxiety in absence. You begin to look at the world without demanding from it what it cannot give. You learn to give without expectations, to love without contracts, to exist without begging. You start to truly respect yourself, and it feels like coming home after years lost in the streets. That's the most beautiful paradox. When you stop demanding attention, the world begins to listen. Because the energy that once scattered in search of approval now radiates from your center. You become presence without needing noise, calm without needing control, dignity without needing witnesses. Acceptance is not resignation, it is spiritual maturity. It's understanding that life is not designed to please you, but to shape you. And every time the world ignores you, it offers an opportunity to look within and find something far more solid than external validation. So today, if you feel like no one cares, stop, breathe. Don't run away from that feeling. Walk through it with courage. Behind that wound lies your true freedom. Because only when you understand that you don't need attention to have value does the real transformation begin, the one that makes you master of your calm, sovereign of your thoughts, and guardian of your peace. When you accept that no one cares about you, you don't become cold, you become invincible. Before we begin, I want you to declare your commitment by writing in the comments, "From today, I stop begging for attention." That phrase will be your reminder that you're here to reclaim your power, not to keep giving it away. Because this session isn't for those who want to be liked, it's for those who are ready to wake up. Today you'll learn to stop begging for presence, to stop pleading for affection, to stop depending on eyes that never truly saw you. This is your moment to prove to yourself that you no longer need to be chosen to feel enough, that you can walk calmly even if no one applauds, that you can be your own validation, your own refuge, your own company. So write it with intention. From today, I stop begging for attention. And as you do, remember that every word is a decision, and every decision can change your destiny. Without further preamble, we begin. First Stoic lesson. Freedom is born when you stop demanding love. Since childhood, you were taught to seek love, not to understand it, to please in order to be accepted, to smile even when you didn't want to hide your pain so you wouldn't make others uncomfortable. You grew up believing that affection must be earned, that love requires sacrifice, that attention is something to be begged for through effort. You became accustomed to measuring your worth through the eyes of others, as if every gesture of approval were oxygen. And without realizing it, you ended up depending on something as fragile as other people's temporary interest. But there comes a moment, sometimes brutal, sometimes silent, when everything changes. When you finally understand that no one can give you love if you don't give it to yourself. In that moment, the illusion breaks, and true freedom begins. Because the one who demands love lives chained to someone else's response, but the one who cultivates it within becomes the sovereign of their soul. That is the deep teaching of Stoicism. Never place your peace in another's hands. Epictetus said it clearly. If you seek outside yourself what can only be found within, you condemn yourself to slavery. It's a harsh truth, but an accurate one. Most of your wounds come from that confusion. Expecting affection where there's no room for it, understanding from those too distracted to listen, tenderness from someone barely able to carry their own weight. When you ask others to fill your emptiness, you forget that each person is fighting their own inner battle. No one can truly love you if they haven't learned to be at peace with themselves. And yet, you persist. You strive to maintain relationships that no longer sustain you. You adapt to avoid rejection. You stay silent to keep the peace. You become an actor in a play where you play the role of someone who gives everything in the hope of being loved. But love offered out of fear isn't love. It's barter, and your soul knows it. That's why, even surrounded by people, you can feel empty. Because deep down, you sense that you're not being yourself, but a version you created to be liked. Seneca, the master of balance between power and serenity, warned that the freedom of the wise begins when he stops needing to be loved. Not because he despises affection, but because he understands that love without freedom becomes a prison. The wise man doesn't reject love, he purifies it. He loves without asking, gives without expecting, stays without depending. His virtue is his refuge. Emotional dependence has a deep root, the idea that without love you have no value. That belief, implanted by culture, family, and lack, is what makes you accept less than you deserve. And so you become a prisoner of relationships where attention is rationed. You wait for messages that never come, for compliments that mean nothing, for gestures to soothe a pain that shouldn't depend on anyone else. The begging soul grows weary, the self-sufficient soul grows strong. Stopping the demand for love doesn't mean closing yourself off. It means opening from another place. It means understanding that genuine tenderness can't be negotiated, that respect can't be bought, that dignity should never be begged for. It means letting go of the need to be liked and beginning to practice the virtue of simply being. It's a quiet but radical transformation. You stop asking, do they love me, and start asking, am I being fair to myself? Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." When your thoughts revolve around what's missing, who doesn't love you, who ignores you, who disappointed you, your whole life becomes an echo of lack. But when you shift your focus toward virtue, toward doing good even when unseen, toward serving without expecting reward, something powerful happens. Love ceases to be a need and becomes a natural expression. The wise are not indifferent, they are balanced. They feel affection but do not dissolve in it. They love deeply but never lose themselves. They know that true love doesn't enslave, it strengthens. That virtuous love is recognized in calmness, not in anxiety. That's why when someone leaves, they don't chase. When someone hurts them, they don't respond with anger. When no one values them, they don't collapse. Their center remains. To stop demanding love is one of the bravest acts. It means facing loneliness without running away, indifference without dramatizing, silence without filling it with noise. It means learning that you don't need to be loved to act with love, that you can offer tenderness, understanding, forgiveness without sacrificing your peace. That loving without expecting anything in return is a higher form of freedom. That freedom hurts at first. It hurts like a muscle stretching after years of tension. It hurts because it means accepting that no one is coming to rescue you. But after that pain, a calm arrives. A calm that depends on no one. The calm of belonging to yourself. The calm of someone who doesn't negotiate their dignity. The calm of someone who has learned to live with their soul in their own hands. Imagine living without fear of losing affection, without measuring your words out of fear of displeasing others, without constantly needing to prove your worth. That isn't coldness, that's balance. That's what Stoicism seeks, for the soul to be so steady that neither praise can inflate it nor rejection can destroy it. Because when you understand that love cannot be demanded, you discover that true strength is to love freely, without fear, without conditions. The day you can look at someone and say, I love you, but I don't need you to feel complete, that day you'll have reached what the Stoics called ataraxia, unshakable serenity. That state where the soul remains still even when the world trembles, where love stops being a contract and becomes an act of virtue. To stop demanding love doesn't make you distant, it makes you whole, because the one who stops begging for affection begins to respect themselves, and the one who respects themselves radiates a presence that no longer seeks approval, but real connection. That's the paradox. When you stop needing to be loved, you inspire the most genuine kind of love, not because you ask for it, but because you embody it. Remember this. The love you expect from others is the same love you must learn to give yourself. Everything else is noise, expectation, and lack. Your task from today onward is not to seek someone who loves you more, but someone who inspires you to keep growing without losing your peace. And if there's no one yet, let that someone be you. Because freedom, true freedom, begins the day you choose to love yourself unconditionally, without permission, without fear. Second Stoic lesson. No one can give you what they don't have. For years you waited for others to give you peace, understanding, affection. You waited for a friend to understand you without speaking, for a partner to hold you, even when you couldn't hold yourself, for someone to see in you what you couldn't see. But time eventually teaches you a lesson that, though it may seem cruel, sets you free. No one can give you what they don't have. Not love, not calm, not patience, not presence. Most of the people who disappointed you didn't do it out of malice, but out of lack. And that's a truth that's hard to accept. Because when you suffer, you want to believe someone failed you by choice, not by emptiness. But if you look closely, you'll see that many of those who hurt you were broken, just like you, and you cannot share what you do not possess. You can't ask an anxious heart to give you peace, nor an overloaded mind to listen with serenity, nor an empty soul to make you feel whole. Epictetus taught that men do wrong not out of malice, but out of ignorance. And that idea, far from justifying harm, invites lucid compassion. Understanding that others can't give you what they lack doesn't mean you should tolerate their absence or neglect. It means you stop taking it personally. What once hurt as betrayal now appears as reflection. Everyone gives according to their level of consciousness. And you've done it too. You've loved without knowing how to love, promised what you couldn't keep, cared without knowing how to care. The problem is that the anxious mind mistakes lack of effort for lack of worth. When someone doesn't respond as you hoped, you think the problem is you, that if you were more interesting, more attractive, stronger, more something, then they'd give you what you long for. But the truth is, there's no level of perfection capable of filling someone else's void. You can give your all and still not be enough, not because you lack something, but because the other person has no capacity to receive. Seneca wrote, "No wind is favorable to the one who doesn't know to which port he sails." Whoever hasn't learned to love themselves drifts without direction. Any affection they receive slips through their fingers because they have nowhere to store it. And you, believing that more giving will hold things together, end up emptying yourself. That's why this lesson is vital. Stop giving from lack. Love is not about saving, it's about sharing wholeness. When you understand this, the way you connect with others changes. You stop begging for affection because you realize there's no debt. You stop over-explaining because you see that understanding can't be forced, it's reached. You stop demanding attention because you notice that someone who can't be with themselves can't be with you either. In place of resentment comes a strange serenity, an acceptance that's not resignation. You no longer need to punish or collect, you simply choose to release. Stoicism teaches that virtue doesn't depend on the behavior of others, but on your own. What someone else can't offer you should never define your peace. Marcus Aurelius summarized it like this: choose not to be harmed, and you won't be. It's not about denying pain, but about refusing to let another's lack dictate your inner state. Freedom begins when you stop expecting emotional repair from the world and decide to be the one who repairs. Many mistake this attitude for coldness, but it's maturity. Because learning to see another's limitation without hatred or disappointment is an act of conscious love. It gives you perspective. It helps you understand that love isn't measured by intensity, but by clarity, that some people love you clumsily, through fear, through their own incapacity, and sometimes that's all they can offer. It's not enough, but it's not personal. Imagine someone trying to give you water, but their jug is empty. You can get angry, you can beg, you can break it. Nothing will change the fact that there's no water. The only solution is to learn to fill your own. That's what the wise do. Instead of demanding, they cultivate. Instead of resenting, they replenish. Instead of waiting for the world to return something, they multiply it. In doing so, they transform lack into practice, pain into discipline, disappointment into strength. You can't live expecting people to treat you the way you treat them. Some can't, some don't know how, and some simply aren't ready. What matters is that you don't lose your essence trying to get from outside what can only be built inside. Peace, love, validation, trust. All of that is trained in solitude. Once you have it, relationships stop being necessity and become choice. You're no longer with someone out of fear of loneliness, but because their presence adds to your life, not because their absence erases you. The wise don't grow bitter when others fail. They grow more aware. They observe the cycle, study it, learn from it, and move forward without resentment. Because they know each disappointment is a lesson in humility, a reminder that we are all apprentices of virtue, and whoever understands this stops living as a victim of relationships and becomes the author of their serenity. Stopping your expectation that others will give what they don't have doesn't make you insensitive, it makes you realistic, centered, human. It lets you love better because you no longer love to fill gaps, but to share abundance. It lets you forgive without humiliating yourself because you know wounds don't heal by repeating the same pattern. And it allows you to remain calm even when someone's response doesn't match your desire. Perhaps the deepest lesson is this: accept that some people can only offer fragments. Not everyone is ready for the reciprocity you long for, but that doesn't diminish your value. Your giving remains noble, even if it wasn't returned, because virtue needs no audience, only coherence. From now on, every time someone fails you, remember this: they don't owe you what they don't have. Their limit is not your wound. Your duty is to keep acting from virtue, not reaction, to give without losing yourself, to love without begging, to walk away without hatred, and above all, to fill your own jug before offering water. Because the most stoic truth, and perhaps the most liberating, is this: when you stop expecting others to give what they don't have, you discover that you already possess everything you need to be at peace. Third Stoic lesson: the indifference of others is a teacher. Few things hurt as much as feeling invisible, speaking and not being heard, giving and not receiving even a glance, writing, calling, insisting, and silence being the only response. Indifference has a cold, brutal way of showing you something you didn't want to see, that you don't control other people's interest, that no matter how hard you try, you can't make anyone value you. And though it hurts, that lesson, once accepted, sets you free. The indifference of others is a silent teacher. It doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it doesn't humiliate you. It simply doesn't respond. And that emptiness, which at first eats away at you, eventually becomes the space where inner strength grows. Someone who ignores you without reason gives you, unknowingly, the chance to test yourself, to learn to stand firm when the echo doesn't return your voice. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When another despises you, the offense lies in your interpretation, not in his act." It's not a comfortable phrase, but it holds immense truth. What hurts most is not the other's silence, but the meaning you attach to it. You believe their indifference confirms your insignificance, that their absence validates your worst fears. But it isn't so. Indifference doesn't speak about who you are, it speaks about who they are. And your interpretation, that story you construct in your mind, is what poisons or saves you. Epictetus taught that nothing external has power over you unless you grant it. Indifference enters through the crack of expectation. The more you expect, the more it hurts. The more you demand to be seen, the more you bleed in the waiting. But when you understand that you don't need to be noticed to have value, the pain transforms into a strange kind of peace. Not because you stop feeling, but because you choose not to depend. The wise person doesn't despair over attention that doesn't arrive. He observes, he understands, he learns, and then he continues calmly, because he has realized that the indifference of others doesn't define him. It only shows him where he was still attached. Every time someone ignores you, and you react with anger, anxiety, or sadness, Stoicism invites you to ask one simple question: which part of me needs to be recognized in order to feel alive? The answer to that question reveals your chains. Indifference is not punishment, it's an X-ray. It shows you how much emotional dependency you still carry inside. If one person's silence can ruin your day, it isn't their silence that wounds you, it's your lack of mastery over yourself. Seneca said it plainly: the greatest power is needing no power over others, and that includes the power of their attention. Learning from indifference means releasing the need for immediate reciprocity. Sometimes the world goes quiet, not because it despises you, but because it's absorbed in its own storms. Not every silence is rejection. Sometimes it's blindness, sometimes ignorance, sometimes simple distraction. But the anxious soul interprets every delay as abandonment, and that's where the wound begins. The Stoic path is about changing focus. Instead of asking why they don't see you, ask why you need so much to be seen. Because the day you understand that, you'll discover that true worth is not proven by being noticed, but by remaining steady when there are no witnesses. Virtue doesn't need a stage, only coherence. Think of indifference as a stone thrown into the lake of your mind. If the water is still, the stone only makes soft ripples. But if the water is turbulent, the stone unleashes a storm. That's how the soul works. When it's calm, indifference barely touches the surface. When it's agitated, it destroys everything. That's why the wise first work on their inner serenity. They can't stop others from throwing stones, but they can decide how deep those stones go. There comes a moment when you finally understand. Another's silence no longer hurts. It teaches. It teaches you not to beg, not to over-explain, not to diminish yourself in search of an echo. It teaches you to choose yourself, to look at the phone without anxiety, to leave empty spaces unfilled by justification, to see that not every absence is a loss and not every void is punishment. Some are opportunity. The strong soul learns to be grateful even for indifference, because through it, intention is purified. It reveals whether you act from virtue or from vanity, from love or from need. If you keep giving even without receiving, you're growing. If you keep acting rightly even when no one notices, you're maturing. If you stay firm even when silence surrounds you, you're attaining freedom. Seneca said, "The wise man is not offended, because he knows that nothing belongs to him except his judgment." The indifference of others cannot touch you if your judgment remains sober. It's not a call to coldness, but to balance, because only the one who knows themselves can decide when to insist and when to withdraw. Only the one who masters themselves can say, "I don't need to be seen to keep shining." In practice, this means accepting indifference as a natural part of life. There will be those who understand you and those who don't, those who walk beside you and those who leave. There will be moments of applause and moments of total silence. The mistake is to think that only the first have value. Maturity comes when you see that both are necessary. Noise exposes you, silence shapes you. Look back at your story. Every time someone ignored you, something inside you awakened. You learned to speak to yourself with more tenderness, to listen to yourself better, to depend less. What you now call disappointment, you'll one day remember as the point where your strength was born. Because whoever learns to live without external applause can no longer be manipulated by attention. Epictetus used to tell his students not to worry about being forgotten, but about forgetting themselves. The indifference of others is an invitation to remember yourself, to reconnect with your purpose without distractions, to act with the same excellence even when no one is watching. The free soul doesn't seek spectators. It seeks coherence. It doesn't measure its worth by the eyes that watch it, but by the serenity with which it stands. And when you reach that point, something changes. You no longer fear indifference. You're grateful for it, because you realize it was the teacher that forced you to awaken, that taught you not to depend on echoes to keep speaking, that gave you back ownership of your attention. And so when someone ignores you again, you won't feel anger, only a quiet certainty. What they don't recognize in me, I already have within. That is the freedom the Stoics pursued, the kind that doesn't depend on being seen, but on never losing sight of yourself. Fourth Stoic lesson: recognition does not define your worth. All your life you were taught to measure your worth through the eyes of others. Since childhood, you learned that a gesture of approval was a form of love, that praise meant you were on the right path. You learned to study to be the best, to work to be admired, to speak to be heard, to behave so as not to disappoint. Without noticing, you began to live to be seen. But what no one told you is that this constant search for recognition is a trap, a silent, elegant, socially accepted trap, but as corrosive as any vice. Recognition is a mirage. It promises fulfillment, but only gives you reflections. When someone applauds you, you feel a fleeting spark of validation, but then it fades, and you crave more. Like drinking salt water, the more you consume, the thirstier you become, and so you spend your life chasing approval that never satisfies. When you get it, it doesn't fill you. When it doesn't come, it hurts. It's the perfect cycle of self-deception. Marcus Aurelius understood this and wrote it with brutal clarity. Fame is empty, applause is noise, opinions shift like the wind. Whoever lives dependent on the judgment of others lives exhausted, constantly trying to uphold an image that never matches their essence. Recognition itself isn't evil, but when it becomes the axis of your identity, it destroys your freedom. Because you no longer act out of virtue, you act in reaction. You no longer seek good, you seek applause. And the most dangerous part is that the recognition of others doesn't just enslave you, it can corrupt you. You grow accustomed to pretending calm when you're broken, to smiling to keep up appearances, to exaggerating your achievements to feel worthy. Your authenticity gets diluted among others' expectations, and the more roles you play, the further you drift from yourself. Epictetus warned his students, "Don't say you are a philosopher, act like one." The wise don't need to be seen because their value doesn't depend on the gaze of others. They do what's right, even if no one applauds, and they avoid what's wrong, even if no one notices, because their peace isn't built on fame, but on coherence. In modern life, recognition has become a silent god. We live before screens, measuring our worth in hearts, comments, metrics. Every notification is a small jolt of dopamine, soothing for seconds the fear of being invisible. But that calm is a lie. As soon as the light fades, the emptiness returns, and then you post again, speak again, seek again. You become an emotional beggar, asking for crumbs of digital validation to feed an ego that lives not on virtue, but on noise. Seneca, centuries before social media, had already warned, nothing is more miserable than the one who depends on public opinion to feel good. True strength lies in acting according to reason, not approval, because reason is constant, while opinion changes with whim. Imagine this scene. Two men perform the same virtuous act. One does it in silence, without witnesses, guided by conscience. The other does it in front of everyone, expecting praise. To the world, both look the same, but to themselves one is free, and the other is a slave. The first belongs to himself, the second belongs to the crowd. That is the difference between acting from virtue and acting for validation. The wise do not despise recognition, they simply don't need it. If it comes, they receive it with gratitude. If not, they continue the same, because they understand that worth doesn't depend on the echo, but on the act. Marcus Aurelius summed it up perfectly. Do what you must, with or without applause. That's the kind of freedom few ever reach, doing good without needing witnesses. When you stop depending on recognition, something unexpected happens. Anxiety dissolves. You no longer compare yourself. You no longer feel the urge to prove anything. Your energy redirects toward what matters. You begin to work in silence, to create without justification, to love without expecting immediate reciprocity. And in that fertile silence, something that can't be bought blooms: serenity. It's not that you stop enjoying recognition when it comes, it just ceases to be your engine, because when you need it, it weakens you. But when you accept it as a natural consequence of virtue, it strengthens you. The difference lies in the source. Do you act to be admired or to be coherent? That question defines your destiny. External recognition is fleeting, but internal recognition is eternal. When you act from virtue, your conscience becomes your judge and your witness. You sleep peacefully, even without applause. You don't need to prove anything, because your soul already knows who you are, and that certainty is the greatest reward. Learning to let go of the need for recognition doesn't make you indifferent, it makes you invulnerable. Because the day you understand that your worth doesn't depend on others' echo, the world loses power over you. No one can manipulate you with praise or destroy you with criticism. You act, you serve, you continue, unmoved by the noise. There's immense peace in knowing that no one can give or take away your worth, that neither applause elevates you nor indifference diminishes you, that who you are doesn't fluctuate with opinions because your roots lie in something deeper, your character. And that's the heart of this lesson. Your worth needs no witnesses. It doesn't multiply with compliments nor shrink with criticism. It is the same when you're seen and when you're not, when you're understood and when you're not, when you're celebrated and when you're forgotten. Because recognition is reflection, worth is substance. So the next time you feel anxious about being seen, remember, the entire universe already beholds you. You need no audience beyond your own conscience. If you act rightly, you are already complete. If you live with virtue, you are already at peace. The rest, applause, criticism, opinion, are merely echoes that come and go, powerless against the one who has already reconciled with himself. Fifth Stoic lesson: acceptance is not surrender. Acceptance is not giving up. It is not resignation or the abandonment of action. It is the calm, undramatic understanding that reality will not always bend to your will, that some things lie beyond your control, and resisting them in anger only multiplies the pain. But the anxious mind confuses acceptance with defeat, as if yielding to the inevitable were a sign of weakness. And yet, the opposite is true. Acceptance is the strongest act a conscious human being can perform. When you deny reality, you fracture. When you fight against what already is, you lose twice. First, because it happens, and second, because resistance destroys you. Acceptance, on the other hand, is not passivity. It is direction. It is the wisdom of focusing your energy on what you can transform, rather than wasting it cursing what you cannot. Epictetus explained it with the clarity of one who lived powerlessness firsthand. It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. The one who accepts is not the one who resigns, but the one who reconciles with limits. They don't say, "This doesn't matter," but rather, "This is what is. Now I decide what to do with it." Because acceptance doesn't mean you like it. It means you acknowledge that it's happening, and that recognition is power. Because when you stop fighting the fact, you free energy to act with lucidity. Most people live in a constant war against reality. They want the past to be different, the present to fit their desires, the future to obey their plans. And in that invisible struggle, they lose years of life. Acceptance is ending that inner war. It is transforming the need for control into the will to understand. Seneca wrote that, "The wise man adapts to fortune as the good sailor to the wind. He does not control it, but he uses it." That is the essence of acceptance. To use the wind, not curse it. Acceptance is not silencing pain. It is allowing it to speak without letting it rule you. It is recognizing loss without making it your identity. It is facing failure directly without disguising it or justifying it, and still standing tall, because when you accept, you are not approving what happened. You are choosing not to let it destroy you. The immature soul reacts, the wise soul assimilates. The difference is subtle but profound. Reacting means moving from fear. Assimilating means acting from awareness, and that transition happens only when you abandon the illusion of total control, when you stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What can I learn from this?" That shift in question transforms suffering into growth. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote, "Love the fate that befalls you." This is what it means to live according to nature. No phrase has been more misinterpreted. It doesn't mean loving pain for its own sake, but finding meaning even in chaos. To love fate is not to worship tragedy, it is to use it as a tool for development. Acceptance is not settling for mediocrity, it's ceasing to waste time denying the life you have, because only those who accept their reality can transform it. Denial chains you, acceptance prepares you. And when you can see life without embellishment, hatred, or drama, something breaks. the illusion of victimhood. You understand that you don't control the wind, but you can adjust your sails. Acceptance doesn't make you passive, it makes you efficient. It teaches you to distinguish between useful and useless pain. The first teaches you, the second traps you. The first humanizes, the second poisons. The first you accept, the second you feed. And the way to tell them apart is simple. If something depends on you, act. If it doesn't, let it go. But don't confuse letting go with giving up. Letting go is maturity, giving up is fear. Sometimes acceptance means letting go of people. Other times, accepting your own limits. Sometimes it means acknowledging that you can't do more today. And within that recognition lies a kind of wisdom the ego cannot grasp. Because the ego believes surrender is loss, while the soul knows that yielding to the inevitable creates space for the essential. Seneca said that the greatest obstacle to living is expectation of tomorrow. Whoever does not accept the present spends their life waiting for a better one. But the wise understand that there is no time but now. Every attempt to control what cannot be controlled is a drain on vital energy. Acceptance is returning home. Acceptance also wears the face of humility, because it means admitting that you don't know everything, can't do everything, and don't own everything. And that admission doesn't diminish you, it centers you. It allows you to act from reality, not fantasy. When you accept your limitations, you become free from them. Acceptance is looking in the mirror without fear, seeing your mistakes without running away, saying, "This is who I am now, but it doesn't define me." It is recognizing that life sometimes hurts and still choosing not to grow bitter. Stoicism doesn't preach coldness, but the serenity born from understanding. And those who understand suffer less. The wise do not ask that things be as they wish. They wish them to be as they are, and then transform them through virtue. That is the paradox of acceptance. Only when you stop resisting reality can you influence it. While you deny it, you deny yourself power. When you embrace it, you regain direction. Acceptance is not surrender, it is clarity. It is renouncing the inner drama of "it should be different" and replacing it with the essential question, "What depends on me now?" That question returns serenity. Because the soul that accepts stops spinning in circles, it finds its center, and from that center, it acts with wisdom. In the end, acceptance is not abandoning your dreams. It is ceasing to fight the facts that already are. It is understanding that every loss, every disappointment, every unexpected turn has something to teach you. And when you accept that, life stops being an enemy, it becomes a teacher. Sixth Stoic lesson: let silence teach you. We live surrounded by noise. The noise of voices, of screens, of opinions, of comparisons, of demands. Noise that doesn't always come from outside. Often it lives within us, disguised as restless thoughts, as repeated guilt, as fears that refuse to quiet down. We have confused movement with progress and noise with life. But silence, that state we so often avoid, is not emptiness. It is a mirror, and whoever does not dare to look into it will never truly know who they are. Silence is not always comfortable. In fact, at first, it can be unbearable, because when the distractions fade, what you hear is what you've been covering up, the inner voice that has been waiting for years to be heard. Seneca said, "The soul reveals itself in stillness." And he was right. In the noise, everyone can pretend to be calm. In silence, no one can lie to themselves. The modern mind has made noise its shield. We rush toward any stimulus just to avoid facing the echo of our own thoughts. We check our phones for no reason, turn on the TV without interest, fill our calendars without purpose, all to avoid feeling the weight of being alone with ourselves. But the Stoic knows that without that confrontation, no freedom is possible. Silence is training, a space where you learn to distinguish between what you think and what you are, between the noise of your emotions and the voice of your reason. In it, you discover that many of your worries are just mental repetitions, old wounds that speak louder when the world grows quiet. But you also discover something far more powerful, that beneath the noise lies calm, that beyond the restless mind there is a quiet depth that has always been there, waiting to be heard. Marcus Aurelius practiced it every night. In his meditations, he wrote to empty his mind, to be left only with the essential. He called this process returning to the soul. And that's what silence does. It brings you back to yourself. It pulls you away from the distractions of ego and reminds you what truly matters. Epictetus taught this with a simple metaphor. No one learns while speaking, only when listening. But listening is not just hearing others. It is listening to life itself. It is pausing to observe without intervening. It is allowing things to simply be for a moment, without trying to control or interpret them. Silence teaches you that not everything requires an immediate response, that sometimes wisdom lies in waiting, in letting the waters clear on their own. A soul that doesn't know silence lives in constant fatigue, because every unprocessed thought accumulates, every unobserved emotion becomes a burden. But when you practice silence, you learn to let the waves of the mind pass without being dragged by them. You understand that not everything you think deserves attention, that not every idea needs action, that often simply observing transforms more than any word. There is a kind of strength that is born only from silence. It's the serenity that doesn't need explanation, the confidence that doesn't seek approval, the character that doesn't depend on circumstance. When you can remain calm, even when everything around you screams, you become your own refuge. Seneca put it differently. The wise man speaks little and listens much, not because he despises words, but because he understands their weight. He uses them with purpose, not anxiety. Because he knows that most words are born from fear, fear of emptiness, of discomfort, of judgment. But silence doesn't need to defend itself, and that's why the one who masters silence also masters the mind. In silence, you discover that many of the battles you thought you had with others are really battles within yourself. That anger, impatience, and the need to be right are born from your own insecurity. That the peace you hope to find in the outer world ultimately depends on the calm you can build within, and that can only be trained through stillness. The Stoic doesn't seek silence to be a hermit, but because they understand that in constant noise there is no space for reflection, and without reflection there is no wisdom. Silence is not isolation, it is lucidity. It is the pause necessary to choose the next step with clarity. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul takes the shape of what it contemplates. If you are always staring into the noise, your soul becomes fragmented. But if you contemplate silence, your soul aligns. Because silence has structure, rhythm, depth. It teaches you that not everything in life is urgent, that you don't need an opinion on everything, that haste rarely leads to truth." There is a simple but powerful practice. Each day, a few minutes of total silence, no music, no screens, no conversation, just you and your breath. At first, the mind will resist, it will want to fill the void, but if you persist, something happens. The inner noise tires itself out, and at that moment, when the mind finally surrenders, a clarity appears that you didn't know existed. The clarity to see things as they are, without embellishment, without judgment, without fear. That clarity is the foundation of inner mastery, because silence doesn't just calm, it reveals. It shows you what you must correct, what you must accept, what you must release. It is an honest mirror. Sometimes it hurts to look into it, but it always heals. In silence, you also learn humility. You discover how little you know, how much you speak unnecessarily, how easy it is to form opinions out of ignorance. And that realization doesn't shame you, it makes you more compassionate, because you understand that everyone is fighting their own noise. The wise use silence as a tool of strength. They do not flee from the world, but neither are they carried away by it. They speak when their words can build. They remain quiet when silence teaches more, and they always listen, because they know that life, if you know how to hear it, speaks even through what seems mute. When everything overwhelms you, don't seek more information, seek silence. When nothing seems to make sense, sit with yourself and listen to what your mind avoids saying. There, in that wordless space, you'll find answers no noise could ever give you. Silence doesn't disconnect you from the world. It reconnects you to it from a deeper place. It teaches you that you don't need to impose your voice to exist, nor shout to be heard, because whoever has learned to be silent has learned to be at peace. And when you reach that point, something changes. You no longer react impulsively. You no longer chase every stimulus. You become an observer. You understand that the world's noise cannot touch you if there is stillness within you. And that stillness, that invulnerable serenity, is true freedom. Silence is the language of the soul, the one that translates what is incomprehensible, that heals what words cannot reach. It is the tool of the wise and the refuge of the strong, because whoever masters silence masters life. Seventh, Stoic lesson: self-love cannot be begged for. You spend years searching for love without realizing that while you beg for it outside, you are denying it within. You strive to please, to be enough, to deserve the attention you think you lack. And in doing so, you strip yourself of yourself. You end up exhausted, confused, waiting for someone to return what you lost, trying to fit in. But there is a truth few dare to face. No one will come to rescue you from the abandonment you perpetuate. Because self-love is not found in another. It is built, cultivated, defended. Self-love is not vanity, arrogance, or an empty affirmation in front of a mirror. It is respect. It is the conviction that you deserve to live in coherence with who you are, without disguising yourself to be accepted. It is the boundary you set against abuse, the pause you take before saying yes out of fear, the calm you maintain when the world tries to convince you that you are worth less than you know. Seneca warned, "The man who despises himself is his own enemy." And that is precisely what happens when you beg for love. You become your own executioner, because there is no act crueler than expecting from another what you refuse to give yourself. There is no deeper loneliness than depending on someone else's affection to feel at peace. Emotional dependence is subtle at first. It disguises itself as kindness, generosity, empathy. You give and give and give. But deep down, you expect something in return: recognition, care, attention. And when it doesn't come, you feel empty, hurt, unfairly treated. You blame the other for not giving you what you yourself cannot sustain. But the truth is that no one can fill a cup that leaks from the bottom. No external love is enough if internally there is no container. The Stoic understands that love is not begged for, it is embodied. It is not demanded, but offered from abundance, not from lack. Because only one who is self-sufficient can love without enslaving, care without controlling, give without losing themselves. Marcus Aurelius expressed it with luminous precision: love when virtue guides you, not when need drives you. That is the difference between loving and begging. The one who begs for love lives in fear. Fear of being forgotten, replaced, of not being enough. And fear makes them docile, predictable, manipulable. They surrender their power for crumbs of affection, and every time they do, their self-esteem erodes a little more. But when you decide to love yourself, not because you feel special, but because you recognize your inherent dignity, fear begins to lose its authority. Epictetus taught that no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. If someone belittles you, ignores you, or betrays you, the pain is inevitable, but the humiliation is optional. Because to be humiliated, you must first believe that the other's worth is greater than yours. And that only happens when you forget that respect is not negotiated. It is demanded through conduct, not through pleading. Self-love is not shouting to the world, "I love myself," but proving it through choices. It is saying no when the situation requires it, even if your voice trembles. It is walking away when there is no reciprocity. It is stopping the effort where your presence is merely tolerated, not celebrated. It is choosing dignified solitude over empty company. Self-love does not aim to fill voids. It seeks to preserve the integrity of the soul. Seneca described it as a form of discipline. He who governs himself needs no approval from others. And it's true. Self-love does not depend on praise. It grows through coherence. Every time you choose to be faithful to yourself, even when it hurts, even when it leaves you alone, you are sending a clear message to the universe. I respect myself, and life, sooner or later, responds in the same language. But the path of self-love is lonely at first, because learning not to beg means letting go of what's familiar, the patterns where you were always the one who yielded, who soothed, who adapted. At first it will hurt. It will hurt not to insist. It will hurt not to seek. It will hurt not to explain. But then, in the silence that follows, a new peace will appear, a strength that comes not from applause, but from authenticity. Self-love is also patience. It doesn't build in a day. It requires observing your thoughts, correcting your habits, treating yourself with the same compassion you give to others, because you cannot demand respect from the outside if you speak to yourself with internal contempt. You cannot expect healthy affection if you punish yourself for every mistake. The dialogue you hold with yourself determines the quality of love you accept from others. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If your thoughts are of guilt, you will attract punishment. If they are of fear, you will attract distance. But if your thoughts are of respect and temperance, you will attract serenity. Self-love is a mental practice, a daily discipline of quiet affirmation. It is not shouted, it is lived. The world confuses self-love with selfishness, but they are opposites. Selfishness seeks advantage. Self-love seeks balance. The selfish use others. Those who love themselves honor others without losing themselves. Selfishness is born of fear, self-love of understanding. The first accumulates, the second chooses. And whoever learns that difference stops needing so much to feel whole. Self-love teaches you not to dramatize rejection, not to overvalue absence, not to beg for what should be freely given or isn't worth having. It teaches you to forgive without allowing yourself to be trampled, to understand without justifying abuse, to care without forgetting to care for yourself. It teaches you that you don't need to become everything to be loved, nor shrink to be accepted, that you are enough as you are, even if not enough for everyone. And when you truly understand this, something shifts. You no longer chase, you attract. You no longer beg, you choose. You no longer fear, you observe. You begin to love from abundance, not from the wound. Because self-love is not a destination, it is a natural state you recover when you stop living in lack. Seneca summed it up with timeless truth. He who loves himself with virtue fears losing nothing, because he knows that nothing can take away his center, neither rejection nor criticism nor solitude. Self-love makes you invulnerable to abandonment, not because you no longer feel, but because you understand that your worth doesn't depend on who stays or who leaves. When you learn not to beg for love, life changes rhythm. Your relationships grow cleaner, your decisions firmer, your days lighter. You stop searching for what already lives within you, and in that emotional independence, a new version of you blooms, one that doesn't kneel, doesn't plead, and stands alone, able to love freely. In the end, love is not losing yourself in another, but finding yourself more deeply through connection. But that only happens when the starting point is respect for yourself. Self-love is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity. It is the foundation of every healthy relationship, the shield against manipulation, the compass in confusing days. Those who truly love themselves don't stop loving others, but they no longer destroy themselves for them. They don't seek to be needed. They seek to be authentic. They don't want to fill voids. They want to share fullness. Because self-love doesn't separate you from the world, it reconciles you with it from a place of dignity. And when you finally reach that point, when you realize that the love you were seeking was within you all along, the game changes. There is no more need to convince, to prove, to win, because you understand that whoever is meant to love you will find you, and whoever doesn't simply won't reach you, not out of pride, but because you no longer walk to the rhythm of begging, but to the rhythm of inner peace. That is the goal of the wise, to love without depending, to give without losing oneself, to live without pleading. Because self-love, in its purest form, is not a shout nor a defense. It is quiet serenity. The serenity of one who knows who they are, and therefore no longer needs to beg. Eighth Stoic lesson: no one is obligated to understand you. One of the deepest causes of human suffering is this: believing that others should understand you. You expect them to grasp your silences, your wounds, your motives, your boundaries, your intentions. You expect empathy, validation, reciprocity. But the world is not designed to interpret your nuances, and that expectation, so human yet so naive, becomes an invisible prison. Whoever needs to be understood to feel at peace will live forever disappointed. The truth, painful yet liberating, is that no one is obligated to understand you. Not your parents, not your friends, not your partner, not your colleagues. Because no one has lived exactly what you have. No one has inhabited your mind, carried your fears, or seen the world through your wounds. Expecting them to do so is a subtle form of emotional manipulation, demanding that someone enter a map only you can read. Seneca knew this. In his letters, he warned Lucilius, "Do not expect everyone to share the same reason, nor for every mind to perceive alike." In other words, you cannot ask another to feel as you feel, or to value what you value. The wise do not demand understanding, because they know that each person acts according to their own level of awareness. And that acceptance, though painful, is a vast source of peace. The problem is that we've been taught to measure love through understanding. If you love me, you should understand me. But love doesn't always understand. Sometimes love simply stays, even without understanding. Mature love doesn't demand translation. It offers presence. Because what soothes is not being understood, but being seen without judgment. And to reach that place, you must first stop searching in others for what you haven't yet found in yourself. Clarity. Epictetus taught that what depends on you is your opinion, not another's. That includes how others perceive you. You cannot control if someone interprets your words as coldness, your boundaries as selfishness, or your calm as indifference. Everyone reads the world through their own story, and if you waste energy trying to correct someone else's reading, you will lose your own voice. No one is obligated to understand you, but you are obligated to be coherent. Coherence needs no explanation. It stands on its own. If your actions are born of virtue, you don't need to convince anyone. Those who live with purpose do not exhaust themselves justifying. As Marcus Aurelius said, the best defense against another's judgment is integrity. But there is a deeper point. Often the need to be understood is disguised fear. Fear of rejection, fear of being misinterpreted, fear of not belonging. And as long as you live trying to explain yourself, you remain a prisoner of other people's opinions. Because every time you defend who you are before someone unwilling to listen, you tear away a piece of your peace. The misunderstanding of others may hurt, yes, but it can also purify, because it forces you to distinguish between those who truly value you and those who only tolerate you when you fit their mold. You learn that not everyone is ready for your authenticity, and that doesn't mean you should dim it. The wise prefer to be misunderstood for speaking truth than applauded for pretending. Seneca said, "What matters is not what they say, but what you do in accordance with reason." And reason for the Stoic is not coldness, it is balance. It is acting from the logos, the serene mind, even when others don't understand your path. because what gives you peace is not being understood, but being whole. When you stop seeking understanding, you find freedom. You stop living to translate yourself. You stop wasting energy convincing, explaining, clarifying, defending. And in that silence, your soul breathes. Because you no longer carry the need for approval, you discover that you can be misunderstood and still be calm, that you can be judged and still remain virtuous. Misunderstanding is a test of spiritual maturity. It teaches you to stand on your own, to not collapse when the world doesn't match your rhythm, to keep your center even when others cannot see it. Because what another fails to understand doesn't invalidate it. It only reveals the limits of their perspective. The wise do not need to be understood because they understand themselves, and that is enough. That is the essence of Stoic autarky, to be self-sufficient in your own conscience, to not depend on external approval to confirm your existence. In Epictetus's words, when a man is content in his own company, he is truly free. Think of the times you suffered because someone didn't understand you. That argument you tried to clarify 1,000 times. That gesture of affection that went unnoticed. That boundary mistaken for coldness. How much time did you waste trying to make another see what you saw? And what did you gain? Only exhaustion. Because the truth is, you cannot teach vision to someone who refuses to open their eyes. Serenity is born when you accept that understanding may never come, and it doesn't have to. Life doesn't need to be understood to be lived, and you don't need to be understood to have worth. The respect you seek begins when you release that demand. Seneca summed it up with a powerful metaphor. Not every sail follows the same wind. Some will move forward with you, others will drift away, not out of malice, but because they sail toward a different horizon. Expecting them to see yours is ignoring that theirs is not the same. The wise bless that difference and continue their course without resentment. No one is obligated to understand you, and that is not tragedy, it is independence. Because when you no longer need understanding, you can walk your path without noise. You can love without demand. You can act without fear. And you discover something remarkable. Those who truly matter may not always understand you, but they respect you. And that respect is worth more than 1,000 empty words of comprehension. The day you accept this truth, your mind will be free. You will no longer worry about being misinterpreted because you'll know that right intention stands on its own. You will no longer seek validation because your peace won't depend on agreement. You will no longer beg for empathy because you'll understand that the most important understanding comes from within. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do what nature requires of you, and let others say what they will." That sentence is not contempt, it is wisdom. It is a reminder that your mission in life is not to be understood, but to be virtuous. The rest, like the wind, passes. So when you feel lonely because no one seems to understand you, remember, the universe doesn't explain its reasons either, and yet everything in it functions with order. Don't ask for understanding, ask for clarity. And in that clarity, act according to your truth. Because those who need to be understood scatter, those who understand themselves stay centered. And that center, unseen yet unbreakable, is the true strength of the soul. Ninth Stoic lesson. Solitude reveals your measure. There is a kind of silence that frightens not because it is dark, but because it is honest. It is the silence of being alone with yourself, without conversations, without screens, without distractions. It's that moment when there is no one left to blame, no one to applaud, no one to distract you from the emptiness you were avoiding. And there, in front of you, appears the hardest truth to face. It's not solitude that hurts. It's not knowing what to do with yourself when the noise fades. We live surrounded by people, yet often completely disconnected. We seek company not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of thinking, fear of feeling, fear of facing that inner voice that demands order. But what most call loneliness is not the absence of others, it is the absence of oneself. Because even among people, you can be empty. Even when loved, you can feel invisible. True solitude doesn't begin when others leave. It begins when you lose yourself. The Stoics knew this well. For them, solitude was not punishment, but test. Seneca wrote, "The wise man is self-sufficient, yet he needs friends to practice virtue. That is, he doesn't depend, but he shares." He doesn't flee from solitude, he uses it. Because in solitude, the wise measure themselves. There are no masks there, no roles, no expectations. Only the bare character remains. Solitude strips you of all that is superficial. It shows you whether you truly tolerate yourself, whether you can be with yourself without external noise to make you feel alive. It teaches you that many of your connections were refuges, not relationships. That many of your routines were escapes, not choices. That many of your smiles were defenses, not joys. When all that falls away, you remain, just you. And that is where the real work begins, rebuilding yourself from within. Epictetus said, "No man is free until he learns to depend on himself." Solitude is the training ground of that freedom, because as long as you constantly need the presence or approval of others to feel valuable, you remain a prisoner. But when you learn to be alone without despair, you discover something deeply liberating, that you don't need to fill the silence, only to inhabit it. In solitude, your true lacks are revealed, but so is your true power. You discover what thoughts haunt you, what emotions rule you, what wounds remain open. There is no distraction to protect you from the inner mirror. And that is where growth happens, not by fleeing, but by observing. The one who knows how to be alone knows themselves, and the one who knows themselves stops being a victim of their own mind. Most fear solitude because they confuse it with abandonment, but not all solitude is loss. There is a fertile, creative, luminous solitude, the kind the wise choose to order their soul, to cleanse the mind of excess voices, to listen clearly to what life is trying to tell them. Marcus Aurelius practiced it every night. He called it retreating within oneself, and he considered it as necessary as breathing. He wrote, "Withdraw into yourself, for nowhere does man find a more peaceful refuge." But of course, modern society teaches the opposite. It tells you that being alone means failure, that fulfillment depends on constant company, that value is measured in interactions. It pushes you to fill every void with noise, every silence with content, every moment with something that prevents you from stopping, because if you stop, you might see yourself, and that terrifies you. Yet solitude, rightly understood, doesn't isolate you. It clarifies you. It shows you which relationships are genuine and which were sustained by your fear of being alone. It teaches you to enjoy company without needing to possess it. It gives you space to reflect before acting, to heal before giving again. It teaches you that to love is not to cling, but to share from the abundance of one who already has themselves. Seneca warned, "The soul that never withdraws into itself becomes dispersed." Solitude is that withdrawal. It's the time you gather your scattered thoughts, your neglected emotions, your postponed dreams. It's where you become your own companion, and you discover that when you care for yourself, solitude ceases to hurt. There comes a moment in maturity when you need to step away, not because you despise the world, but because you need to hear yourself without interruption. That retreat is not escape, it's self-care. It's putting your pieces back in order. It's accepting that you cannot offer the world a healthy version of yourself if you cannot be with yourself without anxiety. The wise do not seek to escape the world, but they do not fear being alone either. They know that external noise becomes bearable only when internal noise goes quiet. That's why they choose pauses, moments of silence, deliberate solitude, because they understand that every minute of calm is an investment in clarity. Solitude also teaches gratitude. When you return to contact with others, you do so without demands. You no longer seek to fill voids, but to share fullness. You no longer ask to be understood, only to be respected. because you understand that relationships are not walls to lean on, but mirrors in which to continue growing. Epictetus said, "If you wish to be invincible, place your well-being in nothing outside your control." And no one depends more on others than the one who fears being alone. Solitude, then, is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It shows you that your well-being depends only on your thoughts, your attitude, your virtue. At first, solitude burns. It burns because it reveals. But later, when you learn to live with it, it becomes fire that purifies. You begin to enjoy the silence, to walk alone without feeling incomplete, to have deeper conversations with yourself. You begin to see that solitude is not a punishment from fate, but a tool of the soul. Seneca understood it well when he said, "No one can be happy who depends on another for it." And that phrase, so simple, contains one of life's most powerful truths. Because true strength is not about enduring abandonment, but about not depending on others to feel whole. The one who learns to be alone gains an emotional independence that cannot be bought or taught. It must be earned. Because the one who can stand in solitude does not crumble in absence, does not fear change, does not beg for company. They love freely. They give without fear. They live in peace. And when you reach that point, something inside you ignites. You no longer flee silence. You seek it. You no longer fear solitude. You honor it, because you know that within it lies your true measure. In it, you learn how much you're worth, how much you can bear, how much you can grow. In the end, solitude doesn't separate you from the world. It prepares you to love it better. Because only those who have learned to stand alone can accompany without possessing, love without fear of loss, and sit in silence without feeling invisible. Solitude reveals your measure. It shows you what you're made of when there are no witnesses, no validations, no audience. And if you learn to dwell in it with serenity, you'll discover that what you once called emptiness was, in truth, space to grow, to understand, to find yourself again. The wise do not fear solitude because they have understood that solitude is not the absence of love, but the presence of oneself, and whoever has themselves is never truly alone. 10th Stoic lesson: when you expect nothing, everything surprises you. To expect is to live indebted to the future. It is to place your happiness in the hands of what has not yet happened. And so the days pass, waiting for the message that doesn't come, the recognition that never arrives, the opportunity that may never appear. But every expectation is an invisible cord that ties you to discontent. Because when life is seen through the lens of constant desire, it always seems to owe you something. The problem is not dreaming, it's conditioning your peace to the fulfillment of that dream. It's not loving, it's expecting that love to be returned in the same way. It's not working, it's becoming frustrated when the result doesn't appear on schedule. We live believing life owes us coherence, justice, reciprocity, but life owes nothing. Life simply is, and those who fail to understand that suffer every time the world refuses to follow their script. Seneca warned that true happiness consists in not depending on fortune. In other words, do not tie your state of mind to what you cannot control, because everything you expect, by definition, lies outside of you. The wise do not reject desires, but they are not enslaved by them. They observe them, acknowledge them, and then let them go. Thus, when things come, they enjoy them without anxiety, and when they do not, they remain at peace. Expectation is a mirage. It promises control but steals serenity. The anxious soul, wanting to guarantee the ending, forgets to live the process. It starts demanding that life behave a certain way, and when it doesn't, it reacts with disappointment. But disappointment does not come from what happens, but from what you expected to happen. That is why those who learn not to expect become invulnerable. Those who expect nothing are never disappointed. Those who cling to nothing suffer no loss. Those who demand nothing are quicker to give thanks. And that is the beginning of inner freedom, letting life surprise you. not because you renounce desire, but because you no longer turn it into a condition. Epictetus taught it with precision. Do not seek for things to happen as you wish, but wish for things to happen as they do, and you will be content. That phrase, so simple, holds the key to active detachment. It is not passivity, it is wisdom. It is understanding that your task is to act with virtue, not to control the outcome, because the outcome belongs to the greater order of things, not to your will. The human mind tends to project. It builds stories, imagines answers, anticipates endings, and each projection creates an expectation. When the world fails to meet it, the mind suffers, not because something bad occurred, but because the fantasy it built collapsed. In other words, reality doesn't hurt you, your version of it does. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly: accept whatever comes to you, woven in the pattern of your destiny, for what could more aptly fit your needs. This amor fati, the love of fate, is not resignation. It is deep acceptance. It is the attitude of a soul that embraces the present without demanding that it be different. Because the wise understand that resisting what is means losing twice, first to the event itself, and then to your peace. When you release expectations, you regain a capacity that anxiety had stolen, the capacity for wonder. Suddenly, small things become grand. The ordinary becomes enough. The morning sun, the warmth of coffee, a quiet conversation, a moment of stillness, everything regains its value, because you are no longer waiting for the extraordinary. You are learning to see the extraordinary in the simple. Not expecting doesn't mean not wanting. It means wanting without slavery. It means enjoying without need for guarantees. It means acting with intention, but without emotional contracts with results. It means trusting that, even if you don't understand why, what happens always makes sense within the natural order of the cosmos. Seneca explained it like this: the wise man fits himself to destiny, not destiny to himself. That is the difference between acceptance and surrender. Acceptance is not losing, it is ceasing to fight the inevitable. It is understanding that the river flows with or without your permission, and your task is not to change its course, but to learn to swim in it serenely. Expectations also poison relationships. You expect to be understood, appreciated, reciprocated, but no one is obliged to do so. When you grasp that, resentment fades. You begin to love without accounting, to give without keeping score, to serve without demand. And paradoxically, the less you expect, the more you receive, because life opens itself to those who do not force it. Stoicism doesn't ask you not to feel. It teaches you not to depend. It doesn't ask for coldness. It offers clarity. It shows that control is an illusion, but choice is power. You can choose how to think, how to act, how to interpret what happens. That choice, small, internal, silent, is the root of lasting peace. When you learn not to expect, you discover a calm that the world cannot break, the calm of one who trusts in their virtue, who doesn't need things to go as planned to remain balanced. You begin to flow, not because you've given up, but because you understand that life doesn't belong to you. You belong to life. The wise live prepared for everything and surprised by everything. They are not hardened, yet they are not naive. They walk lightly, knowing that all they have can be lost, and yet they will not lose themselves, because their treasure is not in outcomes but in attitude. When you expect nothing, everything surprises you. It is not a motto for the resigned, it is a practice for the free. Because the soul that does not demand is capable of seeing beauty where it once saw lack. It is capable of gratitude even for what it doesn't understand. And in that gratitude is born an unshakable serenity. The serenity of one who no longer measures life by what they receive, but by how they live it. Stoicism invites you to live without the weight of expectation, to let the present be enough. To release the obsession with control and trust in the natural order, to replace anxiety with curiosity, impatience with presence, complaint with gratitude. And when you finally achieve that, the world changes. not because the world has changed, but because your gaze has. You discover that nothing is missing, because nothing was ever promised. You discover that everything that arrives is a gift, not a right, and that every day you breathe is, in itself, the greatest surprise. So don't expect, observe, give thanks, act, let go. Because as long as you keep expecting, you postpone your peace. But when you stop, life, without warning, begins to surprise you. When the soul stops begging for attention, there comes a point on the path where words become unnecessary, not because you have understood everything, but because you finally realize there is nothing left to explain. That point arrives when you stop fighting life, when you stop shouting at the world to notice you, to understand you, to give back what you once gave. It arrives when silence stops feeling like punishment and becomes company. Perhaps this is the hardest lesson of all. No one is coming to rescue you. No one will fill the emptiness you refuse to face. No one will order your thoughts or return the time you spent on causes that never deserved your energy. And instead of tragedy, that realization is liberation. Because the moment you accept that no one cares for you in the exact way you crave, you take back the power to care for yourself. Epictetus said it with brutal clarity. If you want to be invincible, place your happiness in nothing that depends on another. That phrase, more than a warning, is a doorway into a life where you no longer negotiate your calm with the external world, where you no longer beg for validation, affection, or recognition, where your own coherence is enough to let you sleep in peace. Think of this. How much of your life have you wasted waiting for something that never came? A message, an apology, a reward, a gesture. Anxiety is born in that waiting, in that need for the world to behave the way you wish. But serenity comes when you understand the world does not have to. The order of life is not designed from your desires, but from reality itself. Seneca wrote that the greatest power of man lies in mastering his mind. Not in mastering others, not in controlling fate, but in governing that inner space where your judgments and reactions are born. Everything else is noise, everything else is illusion. When you learn to look without demanding, something within you changes in texture. What once hurt now teaches. What once suffocated now frees. What once seemed injustice reveals itself as training. And what you once called loneliness becomes home. Because when the soul stops begging for attention, it finds something far more valuable than the love of others. It finds self-respect. The wise do not seek to please, they seek integrity. They do not seek attention, they seek presence. And in that silent presence, they become immense. There is something deeply powerful in one who no longer needs to be seen in order to exist. In one who acts rightly, even when no one applauds. In one who walks in virtue, even when the path is empty. Perhaps you will never receive the recognition you think you deserve. Perhaps your efforts will go unnoticed, your words misunderstood, your boundaries judged. But if your soul remains firm, if your conscience rests in peace, if your life is guided by reason rather than pride, then you have already won the most important battle: mastery over yourself. And here arises the question you should keep close. How much of what you do is still a way of asking for love? How many of your decisions are attempts to be seen, understood, or accepted? Perhaps more than you imagine, but you can stop today. Breathe, observe, decide that you need nothing more, that you will no longer live seeking to be enough in someone else's eyes, that you will be enough even if no one says so. Because freedom begins the day you stop begging for attention and start building your self-respect, the day you choose silence over reaction, action over complaint, virtue over applause. You don't need anyone to save you. You only need to remember that you always could. And when you finally understand that, when you truly feel it, the world will stop being a threat. Every person, every rejection, every loss will simply be another scene in the theater of life. You will no longer be the actor seeking approval. You will be the spectator who understands the play. And in that understanding, the soul becomes invulnerable. So before you end this session, keep this image with you. You're standing in the middle of the storm, yet you don't move. The waves roar, the wind strikes, the lights go out, and you breathe. You don't wait for rescue. You don't scream for help. You just breathe. And as you do, you discover something sacred. Calm doesn't come when everything outside settles. It comes when you settle inside. When you stop expecting, everything arrives differently. Not because the world has changed, but because you no longer need it to. And that is the highest form of freedom, when nothing external has power over your peace. The rest, approval, love, applause, are only distant echoes. What's essential lives at your center. The rest, as Seneca said, is smoke and shadow. Your voice is essential here. Every reflection strengthens and elevates our community, reflecting the true value of each individual and contributing to our shared Stoic identity. The reflection that receives the most support will be set as the standard of this community of Stoic minds. A community that does not flee from pain but walks through it with courage, with wisdom, with honor. We will see each other in our next gathering at Stoicism for Winners, where we will continue exploring the riches of Stoic wisdom applied to modern life. Now, take the opportunity to deepen your Stoic practice with new recommended podcast sessions. Follow us so you don't miss any reflection that could help you at just the moment when everything feels overwhelming. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish episodes designed to accompany you when life feels heavy, when it's hard to stay calm, when you need a word to remind you who you are. Not following us is to risk missing exactly that lesson that could bring back the peace you have been seeking. Until we meet again, remember, you are the sole owner of your perception, the creator of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. This is the legacy of Stoicism, the art of being invincible.